Hollywood didn't invent the war movie, it weaponized it. Before Pearl Harbor blew America's innocence to pieces, the studios were already turning real combat into box office gold, one explosion at a time. But here's the kicker. Most people have never seen the raw, gritty masterpieces that define pre-WWII action. Think you know where the classic war epic started? Think again. Some of these films rewrote the rules, and others, well, let's just say, their impact is still felt in every battle scene you love. Ready for a history lesson, Hollywood style, Wings, 1927. Let's rip the bandage off. Nobody, and I mean nobody, expected a silent movie from the Roaring '20s to hold up against modern CGI spectacle. But Wings doesn't just hold up, it soars, crashes, and leaves the competition in a flaming wreck. Released in 1927, this was the movie that didn't just win the very first Oscar for Best Picture, it basically invented the big-budget war epic. Studios had flirted with aerial stunts before, but director William Wellman was the real deal, a decorated World War I pilot who demanded absolute authenticity, even if it meant scaring the daylights out of his cast. If you think today's actors have it rough, imagine being told you had to fly real biplanes. Yes, actually fly them while cameras rolled in open cockpits. Stars Clara Bow, Charles Buddy Rogers, and Richard Arlen weren't just acting. They were risking their necks every single day. The production blew through more than $2 million, a fortune for the era, with hundreds of extras and even Army pilots drafted in for the dogfights. No green screens, no safety nets. Rumor has it, some of the near misses and crashes on film were 100% unscripted, with Wellman telling the crew, "If you die, die in the camera line." But Wings isn't just about stunts. At its core, it's a story of friendship, jealousy, and the gut-punch realities of World War I. The visual storytelling, remember, no dialogue, gives every dogfight a visceral urgency you can feel in your gut. There's a reason later blockbusters like Top Gun and Dunkirk owe a debt to Wings. This is where kinetic, you-were-there war cinema began. The kicker? Wings was a massive box office hit and instantly set the template for every war film to come. Oscars, adoration, and technical innovation, it had it all. If you haven't seen it, you don't know what real movie adrenaline feels like. All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930. Forget your school reading list. All Quiet on the Western Front isn't just an important movie. It's a punch in the face, then a slow, relentless squeeze on your heart. Released in 1930, this wasn't just the first big anti-war epic. It's still, nearly a century later, the high watermark for battlefield realism. Adapted from Erich Maria Remarque's best-selling novel, the film drags you, kicking, screaming, and totally unprepared, into the mud and misery of World War I, as seen through the eyes of a doomed group of German schoolboys. Director Louis Milestone didn't just break taboos, he blew them up. Studios wanted patriotic heroics. What they got was 2 hours of trench foot, terror, and trauma. Actors rehearsed in actual trenches, crawling through mud, dodging real explosions. Milestone famously insisted on using thousands of extras, firing live ammunition over their heads for extra realism. No, really. And the result? Battle scenes that still feel like newsreel footage. Limbs fly, men break, hope dies. And you can bet the censors had a meltdown. But the power of All Quiet isn't just in the blood and thunder. It's in the slow, horrifying erosion of humanity. By the time young Paul Baumer stares into the camera for the last time, you feel every shred of his innocence torn away. No stirring speeches, no last-minute redemption. Just a silent, shell-shocked finale that still leaves audiences rattled. This wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural grenade, banned in Nazi Germany, shown in schools across America. It made veterans cry and warmongers squirm. It won Best Picture and Best Director. But more than that, it made Hollywood and the world think twice about glorifying combat. In short, you haven't seen a real war film until you've survived All Quiet on the Western Front. Hell's Angels, 1930. Let's talk about chaos, ego, and sheer reckless ambition, because Hell's Angels is where they all crash land in the most spectacular way possible. Before CGI, before insurance adjusters had a say, You had Howard Hughes, a millionaire madman and aviation obsessive, throwing cash and caution to the wind. Hell's Angels is more than a film. It's a full-throttle fever dream that redefined aerial combat on screen and nearly killed half of Hollywood in the process. How wild was the production? Hughes started shooting as a silent picture in 1927. When talkies took over, he threw out most of what he'd done and reshot everything with new stars and a new script. He even fired his original lead, Greta Nissen, because her Norwegian accent didn't fit the British setting. Instead, a then-unknown Jean Harlow stepped in, igniting her stardom with a single, smoldering glance. But the real stars? The planes. Hughes bought, borrowed, or built more than 40 World War I aircraft, hiring real barnstorming pilots to perform dangerous maneuvers that had never been attempted for cameras. No exaggeration, 3 pilots died during filming. Hughes himself nearly lost his life pulling off a stunt after all the pros refused. The dogfights, the bombing runs, the dizzying shots from inside spinning cockpits. These were all captured with homemade camera rigs Hughes invented on the fly. The budget ballooned to $4 million, about $70 million today. The finished film is pure adrenaline, roaring engines, exploding zeppelins, and dogfights filmed so close you can practically smell the gasoline. But here's the twist. Hell's Angels is no brainless thrill ride. For all its wild spectacle, it's also a story of brothers, loyalty, and betrayal set against the carnage of the Great War. The climactic raid on a German munitions depot is both breathtaking and tragic, pulling no punches about the cost of glory. Critics and censors at the time were split. Was it genius or just madness with a bankroll? Either way, Hell's Angels left a crater in Hollywood. It pushed technology, ruined budgets, launched Harlow, and made Howard Hughes a legend. You can see its DNA in everything from the Blue Max to Top Gun. If you want to know what it looks like when cinema risks everything for spectacle, buckle up. This is where the ride begins. The Dawn Patrol, 1930 and 1938. Most war movies pick a side and stick to it. The Dawn Patrol goes further. It stares death in the face, twice, and dares you to look away. What's crazier? Both the 1930 original and the 1938 remake with Errol Flynn, David Niven, and Basil Rathbone are so good, it's impossible to pick a favorite. These films don't just dramatize the war in the air, they turn it into a slow, psychological striptease, peeling back the bravado and showing the wounds nobody wants to see. Set in the British Royal Flying Corps during World War I, both versions focus on a group of young pilots, led by tough but haunted squadron leaders. Every night brings new losses. Every dawn, new recruits fly out to almost certain death. The air battles are intense, but the real drama unfolds on the ground, where the survivors drink, crack bad jokes, and try to forget how many friends they've just lost. You can smell the whiskey and fear in every frame. Director Howard Hawks' 1930 version was all grit, all nerve. The planes were real, the stakes high, and the cast, Richard Barthelmess, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., didn't just play soldiers, they lived the exhaustion and fatalism. The flying sequences are so visceral, you can feel the G-forces, with actors taking to the skies for real. Fast forward 8 years, and Edmund Goulding's Technicolor remake turned up the emotional volume, casting Errol Flynn as the tormented Major Brand and David Niven as his doomed best friend. Flynn's matinee idol swagger cracks open, revealing the guilt and helplessness that haunts commanders forced to send boys to die. What sets the Dawn Patrol apart is its honesty. There's no rah-rah heroism here, just men barely holding it together, fighting not for glory, but to keep their humanity. Both versions won raves, especially for their raw, unflinching look at the cost of command. No surprise, the 1938 version snagged the Oscar for Best Story. Bottom line, The Dawn Patrol is essential viewing, twice over. If you want the soul of pre-WWII combat films distilled into pure, cinematic heartbreak, look no further. The Big Parade, 1925. If you think war movies from the silent era can't shake you, The Big Parade is here to slap that notion straight out of your head. This is King Vidor's masterpiece, a film that single-handedly turned the Great War from distant history into gut-wrenching cinematic immediacy. Released in 1925, it smashed box office records, pulled audiences out of their seats, and proved that you didn't need dialogue to hear the screams of battle. Here's the hook. Instead of focusing on hardened warriors or patriotic leaders, the big parade follows Jim Apperson, a rich, aimless American kid who stumbles into the trenches of France. The first act is almost disarmingly light. Jim befriends two working-class guys, learns to march, and falls hopelessly in love with a French farm girl. For a while, you almost forget there's a war outside. Then the shelling starts, and Vidor plunges you into mud, blood, and chaos so real it could make a battle-hardened Marine flinch. No movie at the time had ever shown war like this. The advance through no man's land is so agonizingly slow, you feel every inch the characters crawl. Bullets whiz, bodies drop, and Vidor's sweeping camera work, using huge tracking shots, real explosions, and hundreds of extras, puts you right in the thick of it. The violence is raw but never gratuitous, and it's the quiet moments that break you. A glance between friends, the blank stare of a wounded man, a final wordless goodbye. The big parade didn't just move audiences, it moved Hollywood. It made John Gilbert and Rene Adore stars and set a gold standard for how war could be filmed, as both spectacle and tragedy. It ran for nearly 2 years in some theaters and became one of MGM's biggest hits ever. Even Eisenstein, the Russian cinema legend, called it a work of genius. So, if you think the silent era is all over acting and melodrama, The Big Parade is your wake-up call. It's a film about how innocence is lost, friendship is tested, and love, sometimes, can survive even the worst hell the world can offer. The Fighting 69th 1940. If you think classic war movies are all starchy officers and selfless heroes, The Fighting 69th will knock that halo sideways. This is Hollywood's Irish-American answer to the Band of Brothers formula, except the brothers are loud, stubborn, and ready to start a brawl before breakfast. Released by Warner Brothers in 1940, it takes you straight into the muck and madness of World War I's trenches, following the legendary New York Irish Regiment that fought in nearly every major American battle of the war. Here's the pitch. James Cagney is Jerry Plunkett, a wisecracking city kid with a chip on his shoulder and a gift for ticking off everyone in authority. When he joins the famed 69th Infantry, Plunkett's bravado is all talk, until he gets a real taste of shellfire and his courage starts to unravel. The regiment's chaplain, played with gritty warmth by Pat O'Brien in his 7th on-screen pairing with Cagney, tries to guide Jerry, but the war is merciless and redemption doesn't come easy. Toss in George Brent and Alan Hale for extra star power, and you've got a cast stacked with classic Warner Brothers talent. Director William Keighley doesn't sugarcoat the front lines. The film's battle scenes were groundbreaking for their time, using real Army equipment and extras, many of them actual veterans, to add authenticity. Shell bursts, muddy chaos, wounded men. There's no shortage of mayhem, and the tension between personal cowardice and the group's fierce loyalty drives the story straight through. Plunkett's journey from outcast to hero is more than just a Hollywood cliché. It's an exploration of fear, failure, and the cost of brotherhood. And here's a fun fact. The real Fighting 69th was legendary long before this movie hit screens. Their exploits in World War I were tabloid fodder back home, and their unit chaplain, Father Francis Duffy, who appears as a character in the film, became the most decorated cleric in U.S. military history. The film immortalized both the men and the myth, delivering box office gold and a much-needed shot of patriotism as the world edged closer to World War II. Bottom line, The Fighting 69th is old-school Hollywood war, rowdy, sentimental, and built to make you stand up and cheer, even if you're wiping away a tear by the credits. They Gave Him a Gun, 1937. If you like your war movies with a dash of film noir darkness and a cynical twist, They Gave Him a Gun is your kind of pre-war cocktail. MGM, Spencer Tracy, and the looming shadow of World War I. That's the recipe for a Hollywood drama that doesn't play by the rules. Released in 1937, it's a story of heroism gone sour, where medals turn into nightmares and a good soldier can become a very dangerous man. Let's set the stage. Jimmy Davis, Franchot Tone, is a meek, unassuming guy, drafted into the U.S. Army and thrown into the trenches of Europe. Under the ferocious mentorship of his buddy Fred, Spencer Tracy, Jimmy discovers he has a knack for killing and that this talent makes him a hero in the eyes of his commanders. But as the war ends and the medals are pinned, the film pivots hard. Jimmy can't shake what the trenches did to him. Peace doesn't bring peace of mind, and soon he finds himself slipping into crime, using his wartime skills in a world that has no place for them. This is not your dad's flag-waving epic. Director W.S. Van Dyke, always a master of brisk pacing, uses shadow, grit, and a sharp script to strip the gloss off the soldier's welcome home. Gladys George, as the woman caught between Jimmy and Fred, adds real emotional complexity to what could have been just a buddy flick. The film is as much a crime drama as a war story, a meditation on PTSD before Hollywood knew what to call it. What makes They Gave Him a Gun stand out is its refusal to judge. Jimmy's descent is tragic, but it feels almost inevitable. A society that builds killers can't just clap them on the back and send them home. It's a tough message, but in the late 1930s, with fascism rising and America debating another war, it was a sobering one. The verdict? This is a film that lingers, smart and somber, asking questions most pre-WWII movies were too scared to raise. Sometimes, the wounds you carry home are more dangerous than any enemy in the field. Sergeant York, 1941. Just months before Pearl Harbor, Hollywood delivered its most homespun, flag-waving, yet unexpectedly complicated war hero in Sergeant York. The film wasn't just a box office juggernaut, it became a pop culture phenomenon, earning Gary Cooper his first Oscar and providing wartime America with the ultimate good guy story. But look closer, and you'll see a lot more than simple heroics. Based on the real-life story of Alvin York, the most decorated American soldier of World War I, the movie opens deep in rural Tennessee. York is a hard-drinking, hot-headed marksman whose main goals are getting into bar fights and staying out of trouble. After a thunderbolt religious conversion, he swears off violence, becomes a model of piety, and plans to settle down. But then Uncle Sam calls, and the conscientious objector is forced to rethink everything he believes about right, wrong, and duty. Director Howard Hawks, who knew a thing or two about action, doesn't shy away from the moral struggle. The movie spends as much time in muddy foxholes as it does on York's soul. When York finally joins the fight, the film delivers its most famous scene. Outnumbered, isolated, and with nothing but his backwoods hunting skills, York single-handedly takes on a nest of German machine guns, capturing 132 enemy soldiers. The way Hawks shoots it, sweaty, tense, unshowy, makes you feel every heartbeat. What's fascinating is how Sergeant York balances its patriotism with real ambiguity. York's struggle over killing, his discomfort with fame, and his desire to just go home resonate even now. Gary Cooper's performance is all quiet strength, making you believe that a simple farm boy could become a legend without ever losing his humanity. Sergeant York became the highest-grossing film of 1941, made York himself a national icon, and gave pre-war America a hero who seemed too good to be true, except he wasn't. For a country on the brink, it was both a comfort and a challenge. What would you do if duty called? Some questions never get old. The Lost Patrol, 1934. Here's a war movie that feels more like a fever dream than a flag-waving epic. The Lost Patrol is John Ford's taut, sun-baked slice of existential dread. Released in 1934, it takes everything Hollywood knew about war, strips it to the bone, and leaves you stranded in the desert with a handful of doomed men and nowhere to hide. The premise is brutally simple. A British patrol in Mesopotamia during World War I loses its officer to a sniper. The sergeant, played with haunted gravitas by Victor McLaglen, suddenly finds himself leading a dozen men through an endless wasteland, no map, no water, and, worst of all, no idea where the next bullet's coming from. The enemy, rarely seen, the tension, cranked up to 11. Each man is picked off one by an invisible sniper until paranoia and heat stroke are the only things left marching. Director John Ford, just a few years away from his string of Western classics, turns the desert into a character of its own, blinding, pitiless, and inescapable. There's no glamour here, only the grinding weight of fear. Boris Karloff, better known for horror, appears as a religious fanatic, slowly losing his grip on sanity. A performance so strange and intense, it practically invented a new kind of war movie madness. The Lost Patrol isn't about tactics or heroics. It's about isolation, exhaustion, and the slow unraveling of courage under relentless pressure. The movie barely runs over an hour, but Ford squeezes every drop of suspense and atmosphere from its setup. By the time the last survivor makes a final, desperate dash for rescue, you're not cheering. You're just relieved the ordeal is over. This is war filmmaking at its most elemental. No glory, just survival. The Lost Patrol influenced later classics like Sahara and Zulu, and its DNA is all over the Men Under Siege subgenre. It may not be the first film people name when they think war movie, but it's the one that'll haunt you longest after the credits roll. The Eagle and the Hawk, 1933. Sometimes a movie gets lost in the shadow of louder, flashier hits, until you actually see it and realize it's the darkest, gutsiest war drama of its era. The Eagle and the Hawk is that film, a 1933 pre-code gem that puts its own stamp on the war is hell mantra decades before it was fashionable. Forget Hollywood heroics. This one goes for the jugular. Set among British reconnaissance pilots in World War I, it stars Frederick March as Jerry Young, a golden boy who quickly finds that combat isn't glory, it's pure trauma. His gunner, played by Cary Grant, yes, that Cary Grant, is a jaded, hard-drinking realist who sees the war for what it is, a meat grinder. Add Jack Oakey for black comic relief, and you have a cast firing on all cylinders. What sets the Eagle and the Hawk apart is how fast it rips away any romantic notions of war. Young is promoted to command, forced to send rookie after rookie into the sky, only to watch them die within days. The enemy is faceless, death is random, and survival is less about skill than about how much guilt you can carry before you crack. March's transformation from eager ace to broken shell is devastating, one of the most harrowing performances of the decade. Grant, meanwhile, is so good, you forget he'd soon be Hollywood's suavest leading man. Directors Stuart Walker and Mitchell Leisen packed the film with brisk aerial combat and stark, shadowy interiors. But the most shocking thing is the ending, a grim, taboo-shattering twist that still feels bold today. Pre-code Hollywood didn't mess around, and The Eagle and the Hawk doesn't either. There's no redemption, just a hard look at the cost of command. This movie didn't get the attention of later classics, but real war veterans swore by its honesty. If you're looking for proof that even the earliest Hollywood could stare the horrors of battle in the face and not blink, this is the film that delivers the punch and leaves the bruise. So, after all those bullets, heartbreaks, and trench ghosts, what do you think? Did Hollywood capture the real face of war before Pearl Harbor changed everything? Or did these early films leave more truth in the shadows than any later blockbuster ever dared? Drop your favorite in the comments, or call out the one we criminally left off. Hit subscribe if you want more hidden history from the silver screen's trenches. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous battles are the ones we almost forgot. See you in the next reel.